In the Great Hall of the People, China's biggest political production is now underway. The 19th Communist Party Congress is a carefully orchestrated event, which only happens every 5 years, bringing together an ensemble of more than 2,000 delegates. But there is only one star of the show, China's president and the party's general secretary, Xi Jinping. In a speech that ran for more than 3 hours, Xi told the audience and the world that China had entered a new era.
我国发展仍处于重要战略机遇期，前景十分光明，挑战也十分严峻。全党同志一定要登高望远，居安思危，勇于变革，勇于创新，永不僵化，永不停滞。
While day one of this week-long event was on open display, the real politics will take place in private. Xi Jinping is the party's core leader, but this Congress will decide who will join him or stay by his side in the upper echelons. New members will be selected for the Central Committee, the Politburo, and the ultimate circle of power, the Standing Committee. Xi has dedicated much of his 5 years as leader to an anti-corruption campaign, in which factional rivals have fallen and potentially long careers for rising players have been cut short. He has promised to keep the party on that path.
我们党要更加自觉地坚持党的领导和我国社会主义制度，坚决反对一切削弱、歪曲、否定党的领导和我国社会主义制度的言行。
When President Xi came to power, he had a dream, the Chinese dream. The goal is to transform the nation into what he calls a moderately prosperous society and ensure China is once again one of the great world powers. More than 60 million people have been lifted out of poverty during his tenure, and with Xi at the helm, Beijing has been exerting its diplomatic muscle. China's economic progress has changed lives, but the drive to create the dream has come with a high political cost. There is little to no room for public dissent or criticism of the party and its leadership. Xi has strengthened both the power of the party and his place as the core driver of reform. And after this Congress, the nation will learn how much longer his vision for China will likely be a reality. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss China's Communist Party further, I'm joined now from Hong Kong by Willy Wolap Lam. He's an adjunct professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. From Ann Arbor, Michigan, we have Huang Ang. She is a member of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and a faculty associate at the Center for Chinese Studies. And finally, from Washington, D.C., Surabh Gupta, senior analyst at the Institute for China-America Studies. Thanks all so much for joining us. Let me begin in Washington and first ask, what do you think we will see as the culmination of this Congress? A new generation of Chinese leaders or the concentration of power behind one man?
I would say we would see the concentration of power behind one man, but we would also see that power distributed within the collective leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. The real question is whether a young new cohort of leaders will be elevated, including in the Politburo Standing Committee. And that will be a key test of the willingness of President Xi to transfer power to that new generation. At this point of time, I think he is at the pinnacle of his power, but what I gauge from his conduct is that he is using his charismatic leadership to further the charismatic leadership of the collective leadership of the party. So we will see where matters stand at the end, by the end of this month.
Yeah, I think that is a very accurate assessment of what we expect to see in the coming years that although Xi Jinping is concentrating power on himself, the key task is really whether he will lay out a set of norms of shared leadership in the coming generations.
And Willie Lo Lap Lam, let me get your opinion as well on the same question.
I beg to differ because we must remember that the idea of a collective leadership was laid down by Deng Xiaoping in the early 80s. And one of the important maneuvers of Xi Jinping has been to destroy this collective leadership and to arrogate most powers to himself. Well, that's why he's been known as the chairman of everything. He's known as potentially the Mao Zedong of the 21st century. And I think at the end of the week, as we know the results of the new members of the Central Committee, and then at the first plenary session of the Central Committee, one day later, the membership of the Politburo Standing Committee, I think it will become quite clear that Xi Jinping has no interest in grooming a younger generation because the die has already been cast. I think he wants to stay in power for at least 15 years. That means until the 21st Party Congress in 2027. So this, of course, doesn't mean that he will have all the powers. The Communist Party has 90 million members, and there are major factions and power blocks within the party. And to a certain extent, he has to share power with other members of the power blocks. But for the first time since the end of the Cultural Revolution, I think we will have a very strong, charismatic leader, if also a leader with a Machiavellian streak, who is determined to exercise power in a very highly concentrated manner.
Okay, Willie Lo Lap Lam, let me ask you further then. Do you think the Chinese public wants that more Maoist-style leadership of a strong man, or are they looking to more of a collective power and newer generation of various leaders?
Well, the Chinese public has no choice. Actually, even the 2,287 delegates who are now congregated in Beijing, they have very little choice. You mentioned earlier in your introduction that there will be an election, but actually no election is involved. It's a rubber stamp body. These 2,000 odd delegates, when they arrived in Beijing last week, they were given a slate of candidates, and there was very little choice involved. And the identities of the 7 most powerful people in China, the new members of the Politburo Standing Committee, had already been decided well before the delegates arrived. So it is a typical Chinese election where the results are known before the votes are cast.
Okay, Surab, let me ask your response then to this. You kind of envisioned Xi Jinping having it both ways in a sense, the party actually having it both ways. Willie Lo Lap Lam does not see it that way. Where do you think he's wrong?
I don't want to say who is right and who is wrong, because there is a considerable degree of inscrutability by which the party operates and how these the national congresses operate. So the proof of the pudding will only be at the end of the Congress, at the first plenum of the 19th Congress. That having been said, let me throw out something out here. 10 years back, it was thought that the front runners for the position were a gentleman who's currently the premier, it's Li Keqiang, and a gentleman named of Li Wanqiu. It was not Xi Jinping. It was not that well choreographed, as you see. There was what was called a kind of an open ballot, a wider list of candidates who were provided even from provinces, who the Central Committee members and the parliamentarians could cast a ballot for. And here was this charismatic candidate by Xi Jinping who just went right up the ranks, got the highest number of votes, and thereby became the leader of the 5th generation. So there are some managed surprises out here, and we should not discount that. And therefore, it is important that even in this Congress, it should not be Xi Jinping who dictates who his successor is. He can set out a cohort, a group, who he would like to see elevated, but leave that to the party to determine. And I think we need to give a little credit out here also how the party works. It is a collective leadership, And also, many of the actions that President Xi has taken, even though he might be the chairman of everything, have followed normal party processes. In the division of labor within the Politburo Standing Committee has not been abused, and those processes have been followed. And on the economic reform front, many of his dictates have actually not come through because the State Council, the government, have chosen not to go down the path that he perhaps may have wished in terms of structural reform. So I would say there are quite a lot of matters which are up for kind of contestation and competition, but I would say a managed competition, and therefore we will have to see where matters stand at the end of the month, considering that he is so powerful and he would like to dictate outcomes, but he should not dictate or each and every he should not be dotting the I's and the T's and leave that to the party members to do.
Okay, so you believe there are...
Perhaps,
go ahead, Willie.
We are different. Yeah, perhaps we are seeing a different party and government. I said earlier that the collective leadership mechanism, which Deng Xiaoping painstakingly put together in the early 80s, because he drew the right lesson from the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, which, of course, was dominated by only one strong man, Mao Zedong. That's why he instituted the collective leadership. But Xi Jinping, as I said, he is a charismatic leader with a Machiavellian streak. So he has been very successful in pulling the strings behind the scenes to ensure that he himself, or at least his own faction, the Xi Jinping faction, are now dictating most of the major events in the party. Just give you an example. According to well-established tradition, under the principle of the collective leadership, the prime minister was given charge of the economy. Previous prime minister, who is well known in the U.S., for example, Zhu Rongji and the previous prime minister Wen Jiabao, they were known as the economic czar. They were the head of this most highest level decision-making body on finance and economics called the Central Living Group on Finance and Economics, which had always been headed by the prime minister. But this changed from day one when Xi Jinping became general secretary. He gave this title to himself, and Li Keqiang, who is much more liberal, much more pro-reform, and he knows the West much better than Xi Jinping. He speaks very good English and so forth. He has been relegated to just carrying out decisions made by Xi Jinping. So there's a fundamental difference, I think, between the Xi leadership and all previous leaderships.
Okay. Okay, Huang An, let me ask you, we have some varying opinions then on exactly how the party will take shape in the culmination of this Congress. But I'd like to ask you, we know the public does not have a voice, does not have a vote in this, but if you can speak to what the public, the Chinese public actually supports here, do they want that Mao-style leadership back again, or are they looking for this newer, more dynamic generation of leaders?
Well, I think that survey results actually show that the prime concern for the Chinese public is continued economic prosperity and stability. So as to how that is achieved, I think that actually different parts of China would have very different opinions. But I think it's fair to say that Xi Jinping is actually very popular among many parts of China, where the Chinese people very much like his anti-corruption campaign. But at the same time, there is also a different part of China that has been very concerned about his very heavy-handed repressive measures in the past 5 years. But the most important thing for the Chinese people is continued economic prosperity and political stability, and that is exactly what Xi Jinping is trying to deliver. I don't quite agree with the characterization of Xi Jinping as sort of a replica of Mao, even though that's very often portrayed in the media. It is true that he has centralized power to himself to a far greater degree than his predecessor, like Hu Jintao. But I think, in a sense, he has come to power in a very different situation. I think when he came to power, he was in a much less secure position. And we may not see sort of the bickering and the fighting behind the scenes, but I believe that one of the major political tasks ahead of him is to try to get rid of the influences of the past sort of leaders. And he has to try to secure that personal power, not only for himself, but for the successors that he will pick. So I think after the Congress, if we can sort of take a look at the kind of people that he has elevated to positions of power, if he appoints young reformers like Wang Yang, that would be a signal that Xi is in fact a reformist at heart, but that he had to first consolidate his personal power as well as the power of his collective leadership in order to take these reforms forward.
I beg to differ. I think it's a fantasy that once he has consolidated his power, he will move towards the path of reform. That's a fantasy. At the current moment, he's grooming people from the so-called 6th generation and the 7th generation. But most of these are members of the Xi Jinping faction. That means his underlings, cronies, and protégés who work for him or with him when he was provincial leader in Fujian province and also party secretary of Zhejiang from 1985 to 2007. At this stage, I have looked at the track records of his protégés. None of them have reformist orientations. In fact, they have enjoyed meteoric rises to the top, even helicopter rise to the top, largely because they have professed full loyalty to Xi Jinping. So, of course, over the long term, things may change. But at this stage, particularly if you have heard Xi Jinping's 3-hour-long report this morning, I don't see any elements of reform as is understood in not only the West, but Asia.
Okay. Huang An, I'd like to ask you again about really public sentiment here, because you said that the Chinese public really wants continued economic prosperity. But Xi Jinping himself even admits that China's development has been, quote, inadequate and unbalanced. And in a sense, China has lost the very ideals of the Communist Party, which is about the shared wealth and the equality that society expects to see. Can he reverse that? Or are those divisions now entrenched in this Chinese economic model? And will that keep the public happy going forward?
That is an excellent question. And by the way, when I say reforms, I mean economic reforms, but not political reforms. It is entirely possible for Xi Jinping and his collective leadership going forward to undertake economic reforms without political reforms. In the past 35 to 40 years, what has happened in China is that China has actually lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It has created a large middle class. But that was actually done without redistribution, without anti-poverty policies. And as a result, we see very high income inequality in China today. So for Xi Jinping to continue distributing, creating this economic growth and distributing wealth to those who have been left behind, you can see that some of his major policies include a targeted anti-poverty campaign to lift the last 10% of the poorest people in China out of poverty. You see part of that. But there are the really difficult tasks moving forward is how to actually take China from a middle income to a high income economy. And in order to do that, he would actually really have to change the role of the government in the economy. You would have to have a government that is much less centered on planning, on engineering, on trying to sort of predict and structure the market, but really let market forces sort of take over in order to create those high-tech creative industries. And so this is, I think, the major challenge for Xi Jinping. I do not think at all that he's willing to let go of political power or to loosen sort of the political control. But at the same time, the type of economic growth that China needs moving forward does require a lot more political freedom. So that is actually the real tension for Xi Jinping.
Okay, if I'm understanding you correctly, Huang An, and let me have Surab comment on this, you think the economy will have to open further, closer towards the free markets in order to continue to create that economic growth. But Surab, let me ask you, that is not the true spirit of the Communist Party. Do you agree?
Okay. Yes, when we talk, we are not going to see political reform or liberalization anytime soon, or definitely not in the next 5 years. We might see a broadening of the space, social space for Chinese citizens, but not necessarily political rights. So yes, maybe from that perspective, it stays on the path the Communist Party has moved ahead on. But you know, when Xi Jinping came to power, in 5 years back, and at the November 2013 third plenum, he put out this long document with regard to the next generation of reforms. In many ways, that November 2013 third plenum presentation document bore shades of what Deng Xiaoping had put out at the third plenum in November 1978. Deng had talked about liberalization and trying to open the economy. And of course, at that point of time, it was a very underdeveloped economy. So it was a very agrarian economy. So open agricultural markets and then go towards light manufacturing. And at that point of time, too, Deng had maintained strong political control so that all the factional strife and the decay that had set in the 1970s could be that order could have been created from that chaos, and then the country could then focus on economic liberalization. In very similar ways, Xi Jinping's November 13th. Can I just finish on that one, please? Can I just finish that one? On the November 2013 reforms, the purpose is, again, try to knock out the corruption and the strife and the factions which have set in to a very large extent, try to bring, again, some degree of order to chaos, and then now move this economy forward from being this manufacturing-led and just purely growth-led economy to a more consumerist economy, to a more innovative economy, and where the role of the Communist Party is more welfarist-oriented too.
Surab Gupta, I am unfortunately going to have to give you the last word because we are completely out of time, actually, for this segment. But I'd like to thank all three of you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers.